Hey, what's up, folks? Pastor Merritt Robinson here. First and foremost, do me a favor. Please like, share, subscribe, comment down below on this video. Greatly appreciate it. Today, I wanted to share something that's a little bit personal. The story is about the attempt to save two family members who were in gangs. Specifically, they were Bloods, part of what is known as the DLBs or Denver Lane Bloods. My aunt, my dad's younger sister, she had three boys. I'll just give you their first names: Aaron, and then James and Wayne. Aaron, I always looked up to him. He was a big cousin. James, the middle boy, we called him Mookie. I knew his name was James, but I never ever called him James. We called him Mookie or Mook. That's just what we called him. And then Wayne was the younger brother. Now Mookie was, again, Aaron. I'm not sure how much older Aaron was than I was, but Aaron was the kind of like the big bro. Mookie was a couple of years older than I was, and then Wayne was like a year younger. So I was like right in the middle of the two youngest. And so that's who I hung out with oftentimes, outside of Aaron. I would hang with my cousins, Mookie and Wayne. And we'd be going up and down the street on our big wheels or bicycles and, just hanging out, having fun, or going back into the backyard and playing around. I remember one time my grandmother, she asked me, Mookie, and Wayne to go to the liquor store and get some stuff. And so there was a liquor store on 108th and Figueroa, but for some reason we went to a liquor store that was on 108th and Broadway. So it was east of where my grandmother lived. And so you would have to go under, there's a freeway called the 110 or the Harbor Freeway. That freeway basically goes from like downtown Los Angeles down south to San Pedro. It runs north and south. And so we went underneath the freeway and went to the liquor store. And I was probably like maybe 7, maybe 6, 7. I'm naive. Listen, I've never been into gangs. I've never been a gangbanger. I was always an athlete. I played tennis. Later on, I played football and baseball. I went to college on a football scholarship. I also played baseball in college at the D1 level. I was an athlete. I was never into gangs, gangbanging, none of that. And so I was super, super naive. But I remember we go to this liquor store, and we're in there, and we're at the counter, and this dude rolled up on us, and he's just looking us up and down. And I remember my cousin, Mookie, his whole demeanor just changed. Like he was like stone faced. And the dude was like, "Hey, what up? Where y'all from?" And me with my silly behind, I'm like, "Oh, we live just down the street." But, I didn't know what the dynamics and the context. Mookie and Wayne did because they lived there. And so Mookie just stone-faced, didn't say nothing, didn't look up. He just looked straight ahead. And the dude was like, "So where you from?" And no response. And so then he kind of left. And so we left the liquor store, went back, gave the stuff to my grandmother, and we kept it pushing for the rest of the day. But looking back, I think that dude was probably trying to figure out where are you from a gang standpoint? What gang are you associated with? Where do you live? Because that's going to determine what gang or gangs you are associated with, right? So anyway, that's the dynamic that my cousins lived with. I lived in Los Angeles, but a totally different part of Los Angeles, and I wasn't in the heart of really a territory. I shouldn't say that, but I wasn't myself affiliated with anybody. Well, I told you that I was an athlete, and so if I had gone to high school in the school district that I lived in, I would have went to Inglewood High School. My parents were really into academics, and they also wanted to keep me safe. And at that point in time, when I was starting high school, Inglewood was going through kind of this dynamic because you had blacks and Latinos, and the blacks and Latinos were getting into it all the time at Inglewood High School at this point in time. This would have been like early 80s to mid 80s. And so my parents are like, "You're not going to Inglewood." So I went to a private school, out in San Fernando Valley. Well, my cousins, they most likely would have gone to a school called Locke High School, but for some reason they transitioned and they used our address and started going to Inglewood High School. And I always wondered, like, why are they going to Inglewood? And I remember we would get mail for them from Inglewood High School, and I was like, oh, they're going to Inglewood High. And I remember asking my mom, I was like, hey, are Mookie and Wayne going to Inglewood? She's like, yeah, but she didn't give me all the details. I just knew they were going to Inglewood. Well, if you think about Inglewood High School, I mean, for a while now, Inglewood is there are Crips in Inglewood, but it is mainly a blood city, right? Well, my cousins, they again lived off 108th and Figueroa. I came to find out later that they were part of the Denver Lane Bloods, another blood set. And so going to Inglewood, quite frankly, made sense. I'm not sure if that's the only reason why, but it made sense because now they're in, kind of politicking and associated with folks who are in the same umbrella as far as gangs. And so, anyway, they're going to the Inglewood High. I go through high school. I'm going off to college, and so I really don't have a lot of interaction with them as I'm going to high school, late high school, and then as I'm going into college. Every once in a while, when I would come back home, go visit my grandmother, I would see them. But as I'm coming out of college, I remember my cousin Mookie was kind of going in and out of jail. He had been arrested, or maybe both of them had been arrested, Mookie and Wayne. And so I find out that they go to jail. And so my mother had one of her brothers was a probation officer or worked in probations for LA County. So she said, hey, can you find out information as far as what's happening with Mookie and Wayne? And so he does his homework, his research. He comes back and said, yeah, they're like heavy in the gangs. Like they are in the system. They're well known. She goes, Mookie is known as Shooter, and then Wayne. I remember I thought it was Lil Bang or Bang or something like that, but he had a nickname too. But bottom line, he said they are well known within the system within LA County as being gang members. Okay, boom, fast forward. I remember I get out of college, I come home, I go visit my grandmother one day. I had heard that Mookie was in jail, but then Mookie got out. And so I see Mookie at the house. He's mowing the front yard. But the Mookie that I had known, like high school, my late high school years, man, this dude looks way different. Mookie was yoked. I mean, his upper body was so big. Little legs, but his upper body. Now I played football in college, so I've seen big dudes. Mookie wasn't very tall, but he always looked like a giant to me because his upper body was so big. He looked like a bodybuilder. And so I remember getting out, and I hadn't seen him in a while. I was like, man, I said, you are yoked. Then he kind of laughed, and we kind of chopped it up a little bit and talked, and then I went in and saw my grandmother, right? Well, fast forward a couple of years later, I get married. My wife and we would go over and see my grandmother and my aunt. I introduced her to my aunt, and so my wife knew, okay, this is where my father grew up, and this is where my grandparents or my grandmother was, and my aunt, but she hadn't met my cousins yet. And so a couple of years later, for some reason, I don't know if Mookie was in jail, but it seems like I really didn't have an opportunity to talk to him or interact with him much for one reason or another. But anyway, so a couple of years go by, and then I take my wife over because I would go visit my grandmother. I try to go visit at least once every couple of weeks, once a month. And so I take my wife over, and when we get to the house, there's all kinds of dudes out in front of the house, and it's a sea of red. And so I remember my wife, she turned to me, she goes, "We're not getting out, are we?" And I was like, "Yeah, we're going to go see my grandmother." Now, my grandmother, her name was Lily Mae Morgan, but as a kid growing up, I thought Lily was Lil. And so I always called her Lil May. And so everybody called her Lil May. Even my dad called her Lil May. So I told my wife, I said, "Hey, we're going to go see Lil May." And she says, "Is it safe?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's safe. There's Mookie right there." And she goes, "Which one?" I said, "Right there." And she goes, "The big dude who's coming up?" I was like, "Yeah, that's Mookie." And so Mookie, he's in like, I mean, everything red. Red pants, red shirt. I think he got red chucks. And then at that point in time, he had a jerry curl, but he's got pigtails. And so he's got his hair like twisted, in sections. And she goes, "That's your cousin?" I mean, she was shocked. I mean, I'm kind of a straight laced dude. She's looking at him. She goes, "That's your cousin?" I said, "Yeah, that's Mookie." So I get out, dap Mookie up, give him a hug, and I introduce him to my wife. And, we chop it up for a little minute. And I said, "Okay, I'm going to go visit Lil May and then talk to your mom." And so that's the dynamic that my cousin was in. Both cousins, Mookie and Wayne. Well, I remember, going back to the beginning of the story, remember Paul in Romans chapter 10, he says, "I have this prayer and this desire to see Israel, my people, saved, to experience salvation." That's what, I gave my life to the Lord in September of 1991. So I'm dating myself. And so right now, the time that I'm telling you about meeting or talking to my cousin and introducing him to my wife, we're probably talking about maybe 94, 95. And so, I had been a Christian for about 3, 4 years. And I had the strong desire to see my family saved. Those who did not know the Lord, those who were walking in unrighteousness, those who were doing whatever it is that they were doing, but they weren't submitted and walking with the Lord. I wanted them to turn and give their life to the Lord so that they might glorify God.